Good evening to you all and welcome to the lecture on Law of Sea and Maritime Law. This is week 3, lecture 2. Now, as we often come across the news that China is being objected, or let's say China is confronted all across its sea area. So, what are the reasons we should be aware about it, or how, whether it's some legal complications or interpretation of law that is creating the problem, or China's asserting its right across territorial waters, exclusive economic zone area. So there has to be some level of discussion on this position also. So China routinely objects to US transit through the strait, claiming that United States is interfering with China's internal affairs, harming peace and stability in the strait. Now this China makes the claim that is across the Taiwan Strait, where the Taiwan puts limitation on the Chinese rights, whereas the Chinese people, they assert, or the Chinese government mainly, why to use here the word Chinese people, or Chinese government, they assert more of the rights across the Taiwan state. So that which United States also object to, and that often leads to the repercussions and statement from the Chinese side that United States is unnecessarily interfering their affairs between the China and Taiwan, and China actually has the rightful claim over the Taiwan Strait. So that is one such area here which is quite vulnerable between the parties. So what basically is, China routinely objects to US transits through the strait. If there is a passage, as stated to you earlier, that the transit passage, that is why it is defined as a transit passage, because the coastal states, they cannot put restrictions on the movement of ship from the different countries. Even if we go by the general interpretation of the law, that may be part of their exclusive economic zone area, or that may be part of their contiguous zone area. But since it is declared now as the strait, for example here the Taiwan Strait, that means the permission under the international law is granted for the movement of the ships. So since it's the permission granted in general to the movement of ship from all over the world, but here considering the China and the US relationship, the China has often objected to the movement of the ships across those areas. So China routinely objects to US transits through the strait, claiming that United States is interfering with China's internal affairs, harming peace and stability in the strait and poisoning Sino-US relations. The United States, on the other hand, views the Taiwan Strait as just another body of international waters where US ships and aircraft can operate freely. Now, this is the position which is according to the international law, which is defined according to the international law. But the Chinese government, they highly objecting to the movement of the US ships as well as the aircrafts. Long-standing conventions, some states like the Turkish Straits and Strait of Magellan are governed by long-standing international conventions. So sometimes it's the historical past that plays very relevant role or very significant role in determining the passage. And that is where we talk about such historical conventions, that is at the Turkish Straits or the Strait of Magellan. The navigational regime applicable to such strait is set out in the treaty specifically applicable to that strait. So although it's based on the historical accounts, but all that is mentioned in the objectives of those historical treaties, that on what basis that the use of that passage has been agreed between the parties. There are no such states in the Indo-Pacific region. Then is the route of similar convenience. This is also an important point while understanding the strait. And even that leads to further discussion on some issues of complexity. Transit passage does not apply through a strait that contains a route through the high sea or exclusive economic zone that is of similar convenience concerning navigational and hydrographical characteristics as the strait. I'll come to this, what it means. But firstly, we need to understand that transit passage does not apply through a strait that contains a route through high sea or exclusive economic zone that is of similar convenience concerning navigational and hydrographical characteristics as the strait. Secondly, this situation. Now, in relation to what we mean by the similar convenience, that is, here the situation occurs when the coastal states chooses to maintain a high sea exclusive economic zone corridor between two land masses by extending its territorial sea to 12 nautical miles. Japan, for example, only claims 3 nautical miles territorial sea in four of its international states: the Soya, the Sauguru, Osumi, and Shima states, retaining an exclusive economic zone corridor through each state in which high sea freedoms apply. The right of innocent passage applies in 3 nautical mile territorial sea. Now, what is the position of Japan? Let me try to explain this here. Now, this is, let's say, Japan, and there are a group of islands. So, firstly, Japan can make the claim up till 12 nautical miles. And then there is another, let's say up till this is the 12 nautical miles. There is another 12 nautical miles for contiguous zone. Then another is the exclusive economic zone. Now, this exclusive economic zone, from baseline to this exclusive economic zone, that is 200 nautical miles, that is permissible. So, instead of, since within this, when it is 200 nautical miles, let's say here there is another state, and they are also making the claims for the territorial waters, contiguous zone, and 200 nautical miles. Now, what Japan has done, instead of taking this 12 nautical miles, what it has done, it has taken this 3 nautical miles only, the territorial waters or the sovereign claim up till 3 nautical mile only, and has, after this exclusive economic zone area, has created a passage for itself. Okay, that is, it uses that passage for navigation beyond high sea area. So that is how the Japan has tried to interpret its system. Now, I'll just explain it to you with further maps, that how it tries to explain. So then Japan has taken this situation. You see here, firstly, this is the Sea of Japan, and then here we have all these Japanese islands, and here is China. So firstly, we see here what is the extent of exclusive economic zone of Japan. So the exclusive economic zone of Japan is like this area. All right, this blue lines, that is all for, that means here it has territorial waters, then it has a contiguous zone, and up till this point it has exclusive economic zone. And China, this is the red lines that show the Chinese people, they have the exclusive economic zone. There is something, we talk about the Taiwan Strait, that is all across here. So, and this area is overlapping area between Japan and China, and it is very famous for this gas fields. Oil and natural gas locations, they have been found all across here. So both the parties do have the claims. Now what Japan has done, it has taken, instead of going for 12 nautical miles as the territorial waters, now from this exclusive economic zone area, it has tried to draw another margin for its movement of the ships across this beyond exclusive economic zone area. So beyond exclusive economic zone area, and let's say closer to which touches the high sea area, so that Japan is using its own purposes. Now what will be the effect on the rights? That is important here. So explaining that concept, here it is the route of similar convenience that Japan has done for its own convenience. Reason being because Japan is the country, it has scattered islands, and it's not simply scattered islands, but its ships keep on moving throughout the world or in many parts of the sea area. So therefore they want passage all across the high sea area, and that should be uninterrupted. And since it is facing the problems with, or there are competing interests with China, so it wants that its navigable route should not be interrupted by the China. So therefore they have maintained some kind of convenient route for themselves beyond the exclusive economic zone, but squeezed the size of the territorial sea to the 3 nautical miles. So here I explain the transit passage does not apply. In that case, the transit passage will not apply. Transit passage does not apply. So in that case, that means that transit passage is specifically for particular country. So, and that is meant for the convenience. So in that case, transit passage will not apply. Why it will not apply? Because that cannot be considered as the free movement of ships for all over the world, because that passage which has been taken alternatively for the territorial sea area, that is meant for that coastal state. So transit passage does not apply through a strait that contains a route through, that is the route through the high seas exclusive economic zone, that is of similar convenience concerning navigational and hydrographical characteristics as the strait. So that is the reason Japan has taken that area for its own purposes. And here it is explained. This situation occurs when a coastal state chooses to maintain high sea exclusive economic zone corridor between two land masses by not extending its territorial sea to 12 nautical miles. Japan, for example, only claims 3 nautical miles territorial sea in 4 of its international straits. That is, in some positions, it is doing like that. The Soya, the Sauguru, Usumi, and Tsushima straits, thus retaining the exclusive economic zone corridor through each state in which high sea freedom applies. So here the high sea freedom applies to the world at large, but the Japan has taken out of that high sea freedom area for its own purpose. The right of innocent passage applies in the 3 nautical mile territorial sea. Now the question arises, what is the extent of right of innocent passage in such cases? So it is 3 nautical miles of the territorial sea area that Japan has taken. Now here I was explaining the map that is on one side Japan and one side China, and the reason why, because of the competing interest with China, they have taken free high sea route, they have taken out of that high sea route area, but they have reduced the size of their territorial waters. And this is the main area of competing interest with the China, because both the parties have realized that there are oil and natural gas area across this east of China. So there they have found some reserve of gas fields. You can see in another map the exclusive economic zone division between Japan and China. So here for Japanese, they have this blue mark. All across here, Japan's claimed exclusive economic zone and China's claim of this exclusive economic zone. And these are the islands belonging to Japan, you see here. So that was the reason, because if Japan does not have the free passage and it allows the movement of the ships all across from all over the world, that will be threat to these islands also. So Japan intentionally has done this, keeping in mind the vigilance for all these islands, and also because it is very much relying on the natural resources in the sea area. So therefore they need the ships always high on sea, so therefore they have adopted this passage. Here again you can see the boundary claims by the Japan, and these are the boundary claims by China. And this is Okinawa Island, belonging to very famous island. It gained popularity during the Second World War. So here they have this gas field. You see this red line, that is the disputed area between the parties, both the parties. Generally, the coastal geography of the Japanese island along with the strait baseline have been drawn, but that do not conform to the requirement called for Article 7, Paragraph 1 of the UNCLOS Convention. For the most part, the coastline of these Japanese islands are neither deeply intended and cut into, nor is there a fringe of island in the immediate vicinity. Basically, for the exceptional purposes, Article 7 of the UNCLOS maintains certain, let's say, flexible requirements. But the Japanese situation does not fall in either of these categories that are listed in Article 7. So that is the reason they have taken another course. You see here what I was telling you across this Soya Strait. So here it is clearly mentioned that up till this point it has 12 nautical miles, but here it goes narrowed down. The territorial waters claim of Japan gets narrowed down. It is now 3 nautical miles here. It's mentioned clearly in the map, international map. If it would have been 12 nautical miles, then that would have extended up till this position, but it has been reduced to this point. And what the Japanese people have done, they have taken the passage across the exclusive economic zone area. So that means their movement of ships can be up till this point. So that will also allow them to keep track of the movement of the ships from the Russian side also. That is one such situation they do have. Then there is another map that shows the 3 nautical miles. Here you see across this island or Osumi Kyoku Island, Osumi Kyoku Strait. So here again it's a 3 nautical miles, but they could have extended up till 12 nautical miles. This is Philippine Sea, this is Japan, and these are the small islands belonging to Japan. So, and this is East China Sea here. All right. Now next, another complicated situation is that of the Taiwan Strait and the Korea Strait, and navigation, how the navigation is possible through the Taiwan Strait and the Korea Strait. The Taiwan Strait is located between Taiwan and Fujian province of China and constitutes a critical corridor connecting the East China Sea and South China Sea. We have discussed this East China Sea and a bit of the Taiwan Strait also, but realizing that there are 3 parties here, China, Taiwan and Korea, then how we allow the passage, that we need to reflect here. Actually, the strait itself is regarded as part of the East China Sea. This is the claim made by the Chinese government that the Taiwan Strait basically is part of the East China Sea. They have their own reasons for making such claims. The breadth of the northern end is about 93 nautical miles, and that of the southernmost end is 116 nautical miles. It is more than 170 nautical miles long and 60 meters in average depth. Now, again, putting this map here, this is East China Sea, this is Taiwan Strait, and this is South China Sea. And we have this Taiwan and China here, and this is the Philippines. So, how we see the movement of the ships here, let's see. The strait is within the continental shallow sea area, that is 3/4 of its water is less than 20 meters deep. The Taiwan Strait is traditionally used as an important navigational waterway for China and the rest of the world because it's open to the world, and as stated to you earlier that mainly when the US ships enter that China has often contested. For China, it is critical sea route from north to south between East China Sea and South China Sea, and also between Taiwan and Fujian province. With the development of law of sea, Taiwan Strait is a key concern both for mainland China and Taiwan. In particular, after the entry into force of LOSC, that is Law of Convention on Sea, or this is the alternate name used for United Nations Convention on Law of Sea. Mainland China ratified Law of Sea Convention in 1996. Although Taiwan is not party to LOSC because of its peculiar status in international community, it declared that it would follow the new legal rules embodied in LOSC to exercise maritime jurisdiction and manage maritime affairs, which can be illustrated respectively by its laws on the territorial sea and exclusive economic zone promulgated in 1998. Now the question is why the rights of the Taiwan, they are contested because many countries, they do not consider Taiwan as a country. So if it is not a country, then it cannot have its territorial waters, neither it can have the contiguous zone or the exclusive economic zone area, neither it can put the restrictions on the movement of the ships for in certain situations. So when the existence of Taiwan is contested by many countries, whether it should be considered as a nation or not. So therefore, the claims that are made by the Taiwan across this Taiwan Strait, they become contestable, and China is one such question here. The Taiwan Strait is generally classified as an international strait in international law, which is defined as a contraction of the sea between two territories being of a certain limited width and connecting two seas, otherwise separating at least in that particular place by territories in question. However, after the adoption of LOSC, the international law governing international straits became more complicated, thus affecting the free navigation of foreign vessels through the Taiwan Strait. Because now, after this LOSC, or use the other term that is United Nations Convention on Law of Sea. So after this, it has become an international state which allows the movement of ships for all the nations, which is not liked by China. So here that has further complicated the situation, and this is the reason China often violates the movement of its ships. And it often says that when United Nations Convention on Law of Sea is interpreted according to the US wishes, so why should China accept the laws that are framed by the United Nations Convention on Law of Sea? So this is one of the reasons why China tries to avoid. China is rigid in not accepting the interpretations given by the UNCLOS, because it says that this UNCLOS provisions are mainly made by Western countries, and their definition of these international states or these international water bodies is not acceptable to China. The definition of international states become narrower and divided. Narrower because under LOSC, the definition of states used for international navigation only refer to those states within the territorial sea and coastal states divided, because after LOSC, it seems that there are two definitions for international states. One is the strait used for international navigation, and other remaining kind of strait. Now, another reason for this complexity is because strait can be partly from, its emergence can be partly from territorial sea waters, and then it is in the, partly it is in exclusive economic zone. Now, when it is declared as an international state, that means it is used for international navigation, but partly when it is again part of the territorial sea area, that means it is subject to the jurisdiction of the coastal state. So that creates some kind of conflicting interpretation of the rules, that to what extent we consider that part of the strait as the transit passage, and what extent we consider that the part of the strait as territorial waters. So the LOSC defines strait used for international navigation as the strait connecting one part of the high sea or an exclusive economic zone with another part of the high sea. So to what extent we consider that the strait belongs to is meant for international navigation? To the extent it covers this high sea area, or it connects, basically it is the connecting line, it connects the high sea area and the exclusive economic zone with another part of the high sea or the exclusive economic zone. So there are two criteria, one geographical and one is functional. The geographical criteria is that the straits connect one part of the high sea or the exclusive economic zone with the another part of the high sea or an exclusive economic zone, and functional one is the strait used for international navigation. Because it could be that the connecting part that is why the connecting part is not mentioned here, or why the connecting part is not the part of international navigation, because that connecting part may lie within the territorial waters of another country, territorial waters of the coastal state. The geographical features of Taiwan Strait indicate that it is not a strait fully within the territorial sea of the coastal states, because it is partly Chinese area and partly in the Taiwan area, but then major part of it is also connecting the two seas, that is South China Sea and the East Sea, China Sea. Under such geographical circumstances, the LOSC expressly provides that the regime governing the straits used for international navigation should not apply to such strait as Taiwan Strait. The geographical feature of Taiwan Strait indicate that it is not a strait fully within the territorial seas of the coastal state. Under such geographical circumstances, the LOSC expressly provides that the regime governing the straits used for international navigation should not apply to such strait as the Taiwan Strait. So why? Because major part of it falls under the Chinese, and then another part of it falls under the Taiwan area. So therefore, both the countries do have the claim of territorial sea area. So then what is left is the very narrow part, and that narrow part is the operational part for the purpose of international navigation. So we cannot simply, here we cannot simply go by the rules of LOSC. Why? Because we need to understand also, we need to understand the extent of territorial waters claimed by both the parties. Nothing in this part affect any area of internal waters within the strait except where the establishment of strait baseline by the method outlined in Article 7 has the effect of enclosing as internal water areas has not been previously considered as such. The legal status of the waters beyond the territorial sea of the states bordering strait as exclusive economic zone or high sea. The legal regime in the states in which passage is regulated in whole or in part by long-standing international convention in force, specifically relating to such states. Now comes the strait baseline, how we determine the strait baseline. In localities where coastline is deeply indented and cut into, or if there is a fringe of island along the coast in the immediate vicinity, the method of strait baseline joining appropriate points may be employed in drawing the baseline from the breadth of the territorial sea is measured. So it's like the localities where coastline is deeply indented. Now what is deeply indented? Like this is the normal coastline, and here we draw the baseline like this. But if, let's say, the baseline is deeply indented, means it goes like this and then it is like this. So this is the deep indented, deep indented, and cut into if there is a fringe of islands, or it can be there are small islands like this across the coast in its immediate vicinity. The method of strait baseline joining appropriate points may be employed in drawing the baseline from the breadth of the territorial sea is measured. Now how we employ in that case? Now in this case the strait baseline will be like this. We cover this indented part, and in case there are islands, then we take the outermost island and then we draw the baseline from here, and from here we determine the territorial sea is measured. Now why this becomes important? Because When I was discussing with you the Japanese territorial seawater, then the Japanese area, they have a few of the islands are quite big, but there are small chain of islands. So how we will measure the territorial sea area in that context? So firstly, before measuring the territorial sea area, we need to determine the baseline. So the baseline will be determined taking into account the small islands, and the outermost small island will be considered for drawing the baseline. But then outermost island should not be beyond 12 nautical miles. It can't be that it is very far away from the main island. Then that will be considered as a separate island. But for considering that as one group of islands for drawing the baseline, we consider the nearest most islands, and out of that nearmost island we take the furthest island, and from there we draw the baseline. And from that baseline we determine the territorial sea waters, which becomes necessary for, now here the determination of territorial sea waters becomes necessary where we are trying to define the strait area. All right, the strait area, to what extent this strait area is defined, and why this we need to define this area, because that is the part of transit passage for international movement of the ships. So for that reason define this strait area. I thank you very much for being part of this lecture series, and we continue further on this lecture, and we see you soon for further discussion on this topic.